Welcome, everybody. So I am Jen Patterson, and I am the in-house money coach for Iron and Pearl Financial. And today you are lucky enough to have the whole Iron and Pearl team here. We've got Brittany and Alex, and today we're going to be talking about how to function on a variable income. Because you know what? Whether a lot of us like it or not, some of us have been thrust into the variable income lifestyle with all of the shutdowns and layoffs of the past few months. Sometimes people with a very steady income that has suddenly vanished. So let's talk about how to navigate these waters if you've never had to deal with a variable income before. So Brittany, Alex, what are your initial thoughts?
Okay, I'll start. I think it's really hard to switch from a fixed income to a variable income because one of the things that we don't know what to do is create the budget. Like when you have a variable income, when you don't know how much you're making each month, how do you figure out how much you can spend? How do you figure out what the means are that you're trying to live in? And I think that can be a really hard thing to learn, especially when you start out the gate. Maybe you just quit your 9-to-5 and your business is doing really well, and you want to take advantage of this extra income that you're seeing, and then maybe 4 months and you start to see the dip. And I think that kind of shock factor is what's really hard for a lot of people. That's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Brittany. And like Jen said, it's been a number of challenging months that we've had. So usually when we talk about this topic, we're talking about self-employed people and business owners. And, of course, it's a variable income because you don't know how much you're going to sell or how many services you're going to be providing. But what we've seen since the pandemic started is that people who had steady jobs in stores or in service industries, all of a sudden, if their business shut down where they worked, then they had no income. And then maybe they qualified for the CERB. And then maybe their store or their business reopened again. And then they had maybe fewer shifts than they did before. Or maybe they had to take unpaid sick leave because they had some symptoms and had to go get tested and then wait for the test results. So not only do we have self-employed and business owners now struggling with, no income or variable income that's less than their previous variable income, but now we have people who, like Brittany said, had the fixed income, the 9-to-5 job, the paycheck every 2 weeks, and now that paycheck can be a lot less than it was before. So Jen talks about this a lot with business owners as well, about, you need to have like a crystal clear picture of all your expenses, like everything that you need to spend money on in a month. You need to know exactly what it costs. And if you're paying things annually, then you need to know, like, on a monthly basis, how much you need to be saving. And until you're really clear on how much everything costs, it's going to be hard to determine, either how much you need or how much to pay yourself, or, how we're going to float from one month to another.
So, yeah, I know, like you said, I talk about this a lot. And I think one of the biggest challenges a lot of individuals have, particularly when we first start out working in the variable income sort of realm, is how to create that budget, how to figure out what to budget when you don't know when that lean month is coming, or a lot of people, or what they're dealing with right now, is when the money is going to be coming back. How to create those budgets and how to create those emergency funds. I think for me, one of, like what Alex was saying, is knowing your dollars and cents and knowing what things cost and when they need to be paid, and having a really, really clear picture of that. I personally call it the minimum viable budget. So that's, if you were to lose your income yesterday, what is it that you need to live day to day until you can get that income back? So what are the costs that you have that you can pare yourself right down to bare minimums? What is that dollar amount that you need to keep your life, your roof over your head, food on your table for the next month? And get really clear on what that number is, because that's going to help you figure out how much you need to save for that emergency fund when the time comes.
I think it's really important also to touch on, for the self-employed people, the income aspect of things. Like for myself, I am an insurance broker, so I get paid off of commission and bonuses. And so that means that I could have one really great month, and then I could have a couple months that are much, much more lean. And so I then need to figure out when I'm creating this budget, well, how much do I actually make? Because one month I might do really well, and the next month I might not make any sales at all. I mean, if it's a COVID month, right? So finding a way to balance it so that I know that on those lean months, I still have that money put aside and I've still paid myself from whatever account or however that looks like when it's set up. But I think it's really important to pick that number that you pay yourself if you're self-employed, and then keep the rest in an emergency fund, keep the rest in your business, whatever that looks like, so that when the months are lean, you still have something to rely on.
And I think what you said there about paying yourself is a critical point with this whole topic, because I know with a lot of individuals who have that 9-to-5 paycheck, really reliable income, the idea of paying yourself is a completely new concept. And being able to say, okay, I'm going to put all of my income over here and only pay myself a small portion of it. It takes a lot of discipline and a lot of practice to be able to do that. But that really is the way to set yourself up to weather those lean months or those lean weeks a whole lot better than if you try and leave it all in the same account and think, oh, well, I can make this stretch for the next 6 months. It's realistically, it's not going to happen. So having it all deposited one place and then paying yourself a small amount out of that account into another one is so, so critical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think that brings us really nicely into the emergency fund aspect of it. So for most of us, most people, they suggest that you save 3 to 6 months. It's much, much closer to 6 months now. For self-employed people, I'd be curious to know from both a financial planner and a money coach, how much you would both suggest people who are self-employed or have a variable income put aside on top of their emergency fund. So if their emergency fund is 6 months, how much should they have as kind of a buffer for when they don't know if they're going to be able to pay themselves?
That's a really good question. Well, and I think that question's changed, or the answer has changed. So, in businesses where maybe some businesses have very little cash on hand because there's always work, or even if tough times are coming, there's maybe some accounts receivable. And now I think everyone's going to realize, like, in a business you need to have 3 to 6 months of expenses like in cash on hand, because if your business suddenly stops producing totally, then you need to be able to pay the overhead. And when we're talking about disability insurance for business owners, we're often talking about, like, if you as the business owner can't work, what happens with the business? And in some cases, well, you've got employees, or you can have a locum come in if you're a health practitioner. So you can still even if there's a decline in income, you can still sort of pay the overhead somehow. But when every business shuts down, then there is no one working at all. And in some cases there is zero income coming into the business. So having the ability to pay the overhead is really important. For individuals, 3 to 6 months. A lot of people are running closer to 3 months, liquid emergency savings. A lot of people relied on their line of credit, but relying on the line of credit in month 4 when you haven't worked for 3 months and you don't know when your next paycheck is coming, especially for businesses like you said, Brittany, if you're working on commission and there's going to be a 6 or 8 week delay from the time you do the work to when you're actually getting paid, then it's got to be 6 months of liquid cash on hand, not access to credit, actual cold hard cash. Moolah, as my kids say, moolah.
Yeah, could not agree more with that. And the way I always look at it is your emergency fund is like your harness, the thing that catches you when you fall, and then your line of credit is that bottom safety net that is your last line of defense. If things go completely sideways, and I think a lot of people view their line of credit as that sort of harness that's oh, it'll catch me if I fall. And it's well, no, because then if you fall and then you fall again, then you're done. You need to have multiple layers of sort of safety underneath you to keep you afloat, because I don't know what's coming. You don't know what's coming. You might be one of those unfortunate people that, you survive COVID, but then something else happens that you didn't foresee. A hot water heater bursts, or, you have some flooding or whatever. Life happens. And for some people, it's going to do them in. And if you've got those extra layers underneath you, you know, your line of credit being the very, very last place you're looking, then you're going to weather these storms so much easier.
I have an example of like life still happening. I have to call the plumber because we can't get, it's the bathtub. It's been slow draining, but now it's like, it's time. I don't know, like what point do you call the plumber? When it's like ankle deep or knee deep? I'm just kidding. It's not that bad. You know, and the neighbor behind me is like, the tree is diseased and it has to be cut down. And then we have to plant another one. And then the other neighbor sent me an email. He's like, so when do you want to put that fence in? And it's gonna be like $3,000. I think I'll double check that. I'm like, oh God, just, everything, nickel, dime. So
it always comes at once, hey? Like when the emergency money that we're saving for, we usually say 6 months because it's not like you're going to have one little thing that happens.
Yes.
I mean, we've all been there, right? It's the hot water tank, and then something happens with the kids, and then something happens with the car.
The car is going to die tomorrow. I'm sure. The fob is broken. The fob is broken. Both fobs are broken. And it's the car. I've already contacted the dealership to say like, hey, what kind of deals do you have? Even though I'm not really into buying a brand new car, but the neighbors own the dealership, so
the importance of being proactive.
Yeah, well, we're just getting ready, right? Like we just have to be ready because the car could last for another 3 to 5 years, which would be fantastic. But you know, it's 12, 13 years old, so you know, it could be any day. So we're just enjoying the time with the car while we have the time we have left with the car.
So let's shift gears here and let's talk about taxes.
Oh, fun. I love taxes, actually.
Who doesn't love a good, tax conversation? So what are your, rules of thumb, best tips for preparing for tax season? Because like it's coming, like Christmas, it's gonna show up at some point.
Totally. So my best advice is just like take 20% and like just send it to CRA. Just say goodbye to your money and send it to CRA. That's like the easiest thing psychologically. If we want to be really strategic and most efficient, then you'd be taking, 20% or whatever your marginal tax rate is, and you'd be putting that into a savings account and saving it, and then paying your taxes when they're due. Once you own a certain amount of taxes, then the government's going to want those installments. So you'll be forced to pay the installments, and the installments will be set by the government. So CRA will say like, you're going to owe us this, in quarterly installments, and then you'll just have to pay them. So for people starting out though, like if you're going to owe taxes, then like you can just send them the money, or you can save it. But the problem with saving it is that, then a pandemic hits. And of course you're going to use all the cash on hand, right? Like you're going to use that cash because otherwise you might not get through. But this is the importance of, having that emergency fund as well as preparing for tax season.
Mm-hmm. What I choose to do with mine is I just put them in a savings account on the side, mixed in with some other upcoming expenses. And then for me, I have a spreadsheet where I keep track of all of it, but I enjoy being really involved in our finances and knowing what's going on. So for me, being able to have that money on hand and knowing that it's in a separate account and that it's ready when I need it, that gives me a lot of comfort. But I'm also the type to pay my mortgage once a month versus twice a month. So I don't know that my advice is applicable to everybody, maybe more the type A's.
Yeah, you definitely need to be on the ball to make that system work, which obviously you are. I think the best advice, so Alex's advice of just sending it to CRA and saying, see you later. Absolutely. If you feel nervous about that for whatever reason, yet you are concerned because you do have a slightly itchy trigger finger, then I usually recommend putting your tax money account at a completely different institution from the rest of your banking. So like you can set it up so that it's really hard to access. So create barriers to your money, deny yourself online access, go into the bank or pick up the phone these days, not go into the bank, pick up the phone and say, I do not want online access to this account. And they have the power to take it away. And that's totally doable. They'll probably question why, but, stick to your guns and say, I don't want online access to this account. Have it be so difficult to get to you that you have to pick up the phone and talk to a human being, when you need to pay your taxes in order to get at it. you know, you feel like you are going to spend the money elsewhere before tax season. Just, you know, get it out of sight, out of mind, because as humans, if we see the cash, we will find a way to justify spending it.
Totally.
Yep.
So true.
All right, so let's wrap up. We are all living on variable incomes and have for a really long time. So what have you learned over the years, and then in particular in the last 6 months, about living on variable income that you can share with our audience?
The one thing that I've learned is to know your numbers. So know what your expenses are and know how much you need to get by every single month. I'll be totally honest. One of the things that I made a big mistake on when I first started with this is that I did that and I didn't account for our annual expenses, which is something I didn't really have to worry about before, because when I had the 9 to 5, I just knew that the numbers added up and it was okay. But then now having these annual expenses, making sure that I included those as well in my numbers, that was a lesson that I learned the hard way. So if I could give one tip, it would be know your numbers, know your expenses, and make sure you include all of them.
Sorry, I disappeared for a second, and
okay.
but I'm back. So yeah, I think that living on a variable income, I really like after a few years and things are like pretty steady, I think you kind of get used to it, right? Like you kind of, it's a smoothing, right? Like there's just a smoothing out where, you know, you have those good months and then you have months that are like a little leaner, and the smoothing really works until all of a sudden there's like no income or no new income because everything shut down. So that's where like using that cash on hand is really important. Looking at the expenses again, like I just did a full review of, you know, all my overhead, and if there was anything that wasn't crucial, if there was anything that could be paused, if there's anything that could be delayed in terms of payments. So those were the first things that I looked at. And then like looking at, I mean, I had to make an adjustment of how much I was paying myself, because if there's no income, then you can't really pay yourself. So yeah, I just had to like review our personal finances as well and see like what our minimum was, what was the minimum that was needed to run the household, which I mean, I already know that answer, but of course I did a whole review again. What can we cut? What can we cut? So
Yeah, absolutely.
Review.
And I think, you know, it comes down to pay attention. And it quite often comes down to that with a lot of things in life. You know, you talk about your diets, you know, if you just eat mindlessly, then guess what? You're probably gonna, you know, put on some weight. If you pay attention, it's gonna be a lot better. Same thing with your money. It's no different than anything else in life. You gotta pay attention, you gotta focus on it. And if you do nothing else, just paying attention, looking at your account, seeing what money is going in and going out, you're going to see a drastic change in how things are with your financial life, with just that one really easy to do change, is just paying attention. And I think that is it. It looks like we've lost our fearless leader. I know she had a few other things that she needed to get to. So Alex, thanks for joining us. Brittany, thanks for joining us. And if you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're all here to support you, and we will catch you next time.